music, news, and your views, What would life really be without an X?
And today we are looking at reincarnation. You know about reincarnation. Good morning, Doc.
Aren't you?
Me also. Apple.
Walk on those.
Yaminado. Yet an anonymous said that yes, here. Yes, reincarnation. So we was our quaba. Yet, two homes and be brave. Yeah, and as a son, and the idea is Yankasa. Is it some fairy tales, fables, or real thing?
What was that? Yeah, she deemed me to say, Ababue, to say,
Probably.
I will call Ababue. Until Yamasana actually say, you are dreaming, be said. And yeah, after the impenifocal will be said, Onipawa, Muya. So if you're looking at Ababue, then you also look at a proverb like Onipawa, Muya, which relates to if a person dies, he or she hasn't really died. Then there's also proverbs such as Onipawa Nitekramampro, that if a person dies, their tongue doesn't rot. Basically, this is the idea. As a matter of fact, on Saturday, we had an esteemed scholar named Mfundishi, who came to the Lion House African Cultural Center, and he gave a very good, what I thought was a very good demonstration to help us understand this concept, where if, matter of fact, let's try it here. So I want you to say out loud, Miwaha.
Miwaha.
Very good. All right, so now I want you to close your eyes, close your mouth, and then think that to yourself.
I've done that.
Okay. So now, as you've done that, did you hear yourself say Miwaha?
Yes.
All right. Did you use your mouth to say Miwaha?
No.
Did you use your ears to hear yourself say Miwaha?
No.
All right. So this aspect of yourself, when you pass away, it didn't require any part of your body, physically, not your mouth, not your head. So what exactly is that aspect of yourself? And when you pass on, would it require your body to continue being able to do what it does? So, I thought that was, a very good illustration to really get at the heart of what we're dealing with. Now, in modern day physics, there's this law of conservation of energy. And what it says basically is that energy is not created or destroyed in a closed system, it's only transformed. Now, this is supposed to be like a new scientific breakthrough, discovery, oh wow. However, if you look at African societies throughout the continent, throughout the world, everything we do is based on that idea. Before we talked about Dikenga, and that's what I showed you before that I have here on my bag. So when you look at Dikenga, what you see here is that this is conception down at the bottom. This is birth. It's also the same as sunrise. This is at the high point. It's the same as noon. And then here we come down to sunset. And what this is also, like when a person passes on, then they come back to conception. And oftentimes I give the analogy of, okay, the human body is supposed to be, if you look at your blood and everything else, 60 to 70% water. So when a person passes on, you have to ask yourself, well, what happens to all of that water? Does it just, magically disappear? There's that water that was in you is no longer in the world. No, this is a closed system. So what you essentially have is that water will leave what was your body and then go into the earth. From the earth, it will evaporate and then go and become a cloud. From the cloud, it will rain and then go become part of the river. From the river, it will go and join the ocean. From the ocean, it will again evaporate and become a cloud. From there, so basically, this water that flowed through the veins of Imhotep, that flowed through the veins of Ptahhotep, that flowed through the veins of Queen Nzinga, Queen Amina, and we can go down the list of all of them, that exact same water is still there. So what aspect of them is no longer there? So now let's talk about the part that isn't water, the physical body. So if you look at what was their skin, if you look at what was their muscle, that when they're buried eventually, and we can talk about, depending on what the casket is made out of, whether we're talking about 100 years, whether we're talking about 1,000 years, whether we're talking about 100,000 years, or whether we're talking about 1,000,000 years, or whether we're talking about 500 million years, eventually that is going to break down and go back and join the earth, which is what it came from initially. So when we're talking about this cycle, it's something that is readily observable. And then also there's this proverb, uh, Biblia say, "Ah, Biblia yi yi," right? So you can understand that this is to say, if one thing doesn't spoil, another thing will not do well.
Because if you sow a seed, it has to rot or decay before it germinates
Very
and
good.
bears food.
Very good. And then even we can look at it on the front that we were discussing it before. So let's say you don't want to die, right? At least not right now.
Yeah, I think that is another thing that for me the treatment of this topic, reincarnation, is important because the fear of death is too much down on Africans. You know, majority of whom want to go to heaven but don't want to die.
Right.
The only requisite means to go to heaven. Anyway, that's on the sidebar. So,
But
now,
let me land on this point that I was trying to make. So now, if you do pass away, you can say, all right, I don't think that's a good thing for me, or especially if it's under bad circumstances, you know, from your perspective. But when your body then starts to, you know, go back to join the earth, you don't consider it a good thing, but the seed from a tree that falls on that same location considers it to be very good, because now it has nourishment in order to be able to become, you know, a strong tree. So one thing, you know, the death or the transition of one thing, the transformation of one thing, then turns into, you know, something else. So again, this is the idea that everything that exists is just going to transform into another. Now, if you look at the ruler from ancient Kemet, Neb-Keperu-Ra, better known as Tutankhamen, that when you look at the name that he had, Neb-Keperu-Ra, translates to the Lord of the transformations of the sun. Now, if you look at everything that you are made out of is the same essential elements that the sun is made out of. And if you look at creation stories from ancient Kemet, they say that Atum, the sun, that everything else came out of Atum. So Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, human beings are made out of the tears of the sun. And, you know, it's very profound because Atum is the same thing that they now say in science is the atom, right? So the atom as the basic building block from which everything else is derived. So you just join those atoms in different configurations in order to come out with a human being, in order to come out with a planet, in order to come out with a moon, in order to come out with a star, in order to come out with anything else. So again, these are deep, profound, you know, quite scientific things, but now they'll say, oh, this is a brand new idea. They won't say that the creation story is actually, you know, the source of all of these ideas.
So now, it looks, the explanation you've given, which makes sense to me though, looks a bit abstract. Can we then say that when people die, they actually, no, they actually come back? I want explanation that would be simple to the lowest thinking mind. You know, for example, I've heard this myth that in the account system where we have the odonko, when somebody gives birth and the person dies, the second one dies, the third one, when the third one dies, they use kind of a sharp metal or blade to mark their faces to identify them. And I'm told when the fourth one come back to life, when the woman gives birth again, the newborn baby can come with those marks on the face. Is that true, or it's just a myth?
Yeah, I've actually heard that attested multiple times among various cultures, and that's, as a matter of fact, why they do some of the markings that they would do in order to recognize if this is the exact same child that came again. Me, myself, I haven't seen some. I actually delivered 3 children. All 3 of my children did not have that issue. They didn't go back. But, you know, these are some of the things, the ideas that, this is why we would say, Yamao Abana Tanasi, which translates to we welcome you, and then we ask you to sit down and stay with us. So when we're asking you to stay, the idea is that if you do not stay, then you will, you know, go back and join, you know, your friends in the ancestral realm. Now, the analogy that's given is that, let's say that you have a loved one, and you see that loved one has trouble breathing, is about to die. Won't you try to do CPR or something to save your loved one, right? So basically, there's a proverb in Chi, atiasefo mpo pe wondodo na mene atiasefo. So the idea is that
Samafo epe dodo na atiasefo. Okay.
So the idea is that even the ancestors want, to increase their numbers. So how much more, those who are living. And the idea is that what you regard as death, which is a transition into that spiritual realm, Asamando, from their point of view, they see what we call birth the same way. So basically in that realm, they would be trying to prevent their loved ones from passing away into this realm. And this is the idea, again, if we look at something like the Dikenga, that we're talking about this transition from here to here. We're talking about this transition from here to here. So as we're trying to prevent them from going into this realm, by the same token, those in the ancestral realm are trying to prevent their loved ones from coming into this realm. And you see different rituals, different things that are done that once the person does pass away, in order to make sure that they're accepted into the community on the other side. Now, again, really what it goes into is this understanding of this analogy that just like a human being is like a living son. So among the people of Congo, the Bakongo people, they have this idea that nothing exists that doesn't follow these steps. Everything that exists follows these steps. And the idea is that everything has a conception, whether it's a human being, whether it is a nation, whether it is a company or business, whatever it is, it has a conception as an idea. From there, it has its birth. You understand? So we can recognize the birth. If even Anansi's story, I'll think up the story and then I'll tell it. That's the birth of that story. And then it comes up to the high point that's known. And then it comes down to its death. And then it goes into a conception stage again, either for myself or for you. You've heard what a story sounds like. So now you come back up with this. So again, all of these ideas, come from this basic understanding that if everything can be seen analogously like a living sun, so too can the human being. So now if I ask you a question, when the sun sets from your perspective, does it stop existing just because you can't see it anymore?
No.
Very good. That's a very easy one to answer.
So when somebody leaves us, we among the living, the fact that we can't see the person anymore doesn't mean the person is dead.
Exactly.
Then we'll go back into reincarnation, but then I think it is important for us to look at death.
Right.
What death actually is.
Right.
Yes. Can you help us with that?
Again, this is the idea that death is a transition from one form to another, from one state to another. Now, even in the course of your life, you can look at the various rites of passages that are seen by African people as exactly this. So if I'm saying, okay, my first, rites of passage is going from the ancestral realm into this realm in birth, and then, once I reach puberty, depending on the African society, there may also be a rites of passage there, Brabro, for example, amongst the Akan, for the ladies. From there, you have another rites of passage which is seen as marriage. That's another change, another fundamental change in states of being. From there, you may attain any type of title. You may become Ohene of this or whatever. That's another fundamental change. From there, you go into eldership. This is another fundamental change. And then eventually you get to another fundamental change, which is the transition into death. So again, this is the idea that this death, this thing that we're calling death, is nothing but a transformation from one stage to another. So you were saying it sounds very abstract. I was trying to give it as concrete as possible. What happens to your body other than it goes back into the soil? You understand? What happens to the water other than it evaporates out of your body and then goes to join a cloud? This is on a very concrete level where you can see the material aspects of what I'm made out of do not stop existing. So therefore the immaterial aspects that I'm made of also do not stop existing. And it also comes to a fundamental understanding of the concept of the person as multiple selves. Now, when we're talking about multiple selves, you can look at the okra and the nkrabia as the glue that bonds everything together. So we say okra, we're talking about that which comes from Onyami, the supreme being. And the nkrabia, this is what is often translated as destiny. as essentially as talking about what you are to do in life, your mission, your purpose, and these types of things. Now, every other part of you comes together in order to fulfill this mission, fulfill this purpose, this reason that you have for being on earth. So once you have this mission, and matter of fact, I was talking about this in my course, Foundations of African Thought, and a friend, one of my students said a friend of his got to a point where he says, I don't have a reason to live, why am I here? And then 3 days later he killed himself, right? So again, this comes into the fundamental nature of having an understanding and knowledge of your mission, your purpose, your destiny, because if you are not clear on that, then you say, well, why are all these different parts together? They can go back and join where they came from. So if we look at something like home, it's coming from the root word home, which is to breathe. So home, this is, they translate as spirit. They translate everything as spirit because they don't have the vocabulary to deal with it in English. But we can look at home as a breath. So as long as you are on point and on your destiny, that's why your home needs to be there. If you don't have a destiny, if
you don't have a purpose on earth,
right, then the home will just say, oh, all right, well, let me just go back and join the Mframa.
So many Ghanaians who were so heartbroken when this young, beautiful lady, singer, Ebony died. Can we therefore conclude that Ebony might have finished what she came to this world to do?
No, it's not an automatic conclusion.
Okay.
There is the idea that Nkrabe ni Kwatibia, which is that the destiny, or the Nkrabia as I prefer,
doesn't have a short route.
When you say Kwati, is to avoid.
Okay.
So when we say Kwatibia, we're saying a manner of avoidance. There's no manner of avoiding your Nkrabia. And there's also this idea, Dia Obewu Ajano na Mutuo. Ajan, that's the word for arrow. Dia Obewu Ajano na Mutuo. And the idea is that someone who is
a giant, I don't know, Umutuano.
Aye. And see, actually said, Ebra, I will say, Ajana Kun, and yeah, Otuana, Ebekun.
Okay.
So the idea is that a person who is going to die from an arrow is not going to die
by the gun.
Now, by the same token, if you do not fulfill your Nkrabia in this particular incarnation, this is one of the main reasons for reincarnation, so that you can come and fulfill your Nkrabia. So the idea is that, and you can even see it in how names are done. Now, usually you'll have Kradin, which are given on the Krada, depending on what day you're born. So Kradin, we can translate that as soul name. Now, if you didn't fulfill your purpose last time, then you will come back with the exact same Kra and the exact same name that's associated with that Kra. So each, we went over this previously. You have Aisi or Awusi for Sunday, that's the Kra of a Sunday born. Then you have Ajo, which is a Kra of a Monday born. And then the names associated, Kwajo, Ajwa, and we can go through all of those again. But Bana, that's the soul of a Tuesday born. Aku, that's the soul of, there you go. That's the soul of a Wednesday born, just like my son, Kwaku. And you have Awo, and that's the soul of a Thursday born. Afi, that's the soul of a Friday born. Amen, that's the soul of Saturday born, which is my own. So if you have this in Krabia and you also have this Okra, which is coming from Onyame, if you didn't fulfill your purpose, and matter of fact, there was an elder who actually has passed away since, Nana Kwekwando, and he said, I wasn't born on Wednesday, I was actually born on a Friday, but because the elder was able to recognize that this is my own grandparent who has come back again, that's why he has the name Nana Kwekwando, because it was understood that he's coming back to fulfill his purpose, his mission as a healer, dealing with herbs. And that's actually what he did in his whole life, wrote books about herbs, all these types of things. So again, and you can even see it in, like, if you have a child who is seen as a reincarnated child, you'll have a name like Nana Yao, or Nana this, Nana Kwame, Nana this. So you'd be like, well, how can a 1-year-old already be Nana? Because the fundamental...
Which has become a battle between Ghanaians and birth and death registration.
Yeah, I'm aware.
I think we'll go there before we leave the studios. Your take on that?
Right.
As they are preventing names like Nana to be registered.
Yeah, and one thing I just did is I just shared 5 images that really articulate what we're discussing here in terms of Dikenga, in terms of this cycle. If you go to the groups and then go to X Live in the groups on the BB2Me, what you'll see is these different stages. So you have Musoni, and that's represented by yellow. and this is the stage of conception. You have Kala, which is represented by black, that is the stage of birth. You have Tukula, which is represented by red, and that's the high point, it's like noon. We have Luvemba, and that's like sunset. This is the same as for a human being, what we would call death or transition. And then from there, you know, you come back to Musoni. And it's interesting, you know, when we even use the term transition, on the way here, I passed by a signboard that for a funeral home, funeral parlor, and it was called Transitions. And again, it's coming back to this idea that, you know, death isn't an end, it's not final, neither is birth the beginning. Now, at our African Center School at Bibi Fahundi Edusiambia, that's actually part of the pledge that they say in the morning, that birth is not the beginning and death is not the end. They actually say that in Chi. They say Awona and Yasha.
So which means it's just a cycle. Everything is in cycles.
Exactly, and this is also the same thing you see in ancient Kemet, where, you know, you start off at the bottom, that's conception, it's also death, so that's Asar. And then from there you go to Kheperi, which translates to become, to come into being. This is, again, like the sunrise. Then you come to Ra, which is the sun in its fullest expression. Then you come to Atum, which is the sun at sunset. And then ultimately back to Asar, where we're talking about, you know, this is the ancestral realm. This is, you know, where you would be reincarnated. And it's interesting that in ancient Kemet, Asar is the divinity of regeneration, you know, and associated with agriculture. Because if you look every year, you know, you go through these steps where you'll plant the seed, it comes up to harvest, you know, the chaff and everything else is thrown away. But then from what looks like death, just, you know, this chaff or whatever that you throw away, that then gives nourishment to that next crop. You understand? So again, all these concepts go back, you know, very, very far. We're talking about to the beginning of recorded history. So you can see also in every single day that you have midnight, and then you have dawn, then you have noon, then you have sunset, and then midnight again. And again, these are what we can talk about layered analogies. I wrote an article about Dikenga, and using Dikenga to even analyze stories, you know, that they have a conception, they have a, you know, beginning, high point, climax, and then an end, that no matter what you're looking at, you can look at it on the basis of this analogy. If you look at on the sacred bark of Tutankhamun, and when I actually went to Kemet, I took a picture of this, but what it shows is a snake with its own tail in its mouth. Now,
it's the tail of the snake
is in its own mouth.
Its own mouth.
Exactly.
What does it mean or represent?
Right, it represents that. So you can look at the head of the snake as the beginning of the snake. You can look at the tail of the snake as, of course, the end of the snake.
Wow.
And what you're seeing when the tail is in its own mouth is the idea that the beginning is the end, and the end is the beginning, that they're in the exact same location. And you can see this in how Akan people do their week. So it's called Nawatri, not Namsong. So if you count and you say, oh, well, there are only 7 days, why are they calling it Nawatri? That's because the beginning and the end are in the exact same location, just like a snake with its tail in its mouth. So you start off on Kwaziata, and then from there you go to Dwada, then you go to Banada, then you go to Ukriada, Yawada, Fiada, Miminada, and then Kwaziada. So this 8 loop is like this, where the beginning is
looks like a yin and yang, what do you call it?
Yin and yang.
Yeah.
That's actually slightly different, because what it's showing you there is that there's a bit of one thing inside of another thing. So it's a similar thing, just in terms of showing a cycle. But if you actually look at the yin and yang, and it's similar to, that particular one is similar to a Yoruba proverb where they say, "Ogbon beninu ago, agosi beninu agbon," which translates to, there's a little wisdom inside of foolishness, there's a little foolishness inside of wisdom. There's a little death inside of life, there's a little life inside of death. And once you come to this understanding, there's this very Eurasian concept called Manichean dualism. And I won't go so far into it, but basically it's the idea that one thing is all good and its opposite is all evil. You see this in Christianity, also another Eurasian, you know, religion, where, you know, God is all good and then the devil is all bad. That, you know, that type of concept and worldview is fundamentally Eurasian, you understand? Where, as we look at, you know, the African worldview, you'll see more complementary opposites in terms of these understandings. Now, there's a text that, so we mentioned before that Ra is the sun at its high point, and Asar is the sun at its low point. from our perspective in terms of midnight. And it said that in the end, Asar and Ra are having a conversation, and in the conversation, you know, they're like, all right, we've come to the end of all of creation. But with also this understanding that this is a cycle, so they intertwine together and then they go off into this abyss, which is what everything started off from. And basically, when I think about that, I think about, you know, life and death without a birth and a dying process. So you just have this point and you have that point, and that's all that will exist in the end, which is life and death both intertwined together. So, you know, these are some of the concepts that we have in our stories that are very profound and very fundamental. However, when the Eurasians came, the Greeks and so forth came to try to study and learn them, they really could not understand these concepts. So what they say is, okay, well, they're just making up stuff, so let's just make up stuff too.
Okay, so now, how do the ordinary person take refuge in reincarnation, and therefore that phenomena of the fear of death among Africans can be reduced?
Right. Yeah, if you look at more ancient times, people were not afraid of dying at all. You understand? They would go to war. They were not afraid of dying at all. Because, you know, if you look at it from this perspective, the worst thing that would happen is that you're waiting in another state, and then you come back, you know, into a different state. You transform into a different state. So if you're patient, and, you know, there are lots of proverbs that talk about the virtues of being patient, then, you know, there's really nothing to be afraid of. So you would see people who will go to the war front, you know, completely unafraid, because they have this understanding that what I'll do is I'll transform into something else. Now, also it goes
there's this movie where the man the leader clones people to fight for him, and their motto is "I die, I live again." So you hit him in the head with something, and he's about to die, and he recite that fast: "I die, I live again."
Sounds like an interesting movie.
Yeah.
Discussion earlier that, you know, we look at these movies that are based on, you know, things that are not real, and, you know, people are talking about a recent movie that's come out, and an elder in Fundishi, he wrote a book about Menchu Hotep, who performed the second unification of Kemet, and he was like, you know, while we're all cheering for these heroes that aren't real, we actually have heroes that are 1,000 times greater than these fake ones, but we don't even know anything about them. So again, Menchu Hotep, you know, did the unification of Kemet after it had gone into what's referred to as the first intermediate period, that he was able to gather the black people together once again into a mighty force. But again, you know, we know the fake ones, but we don't know many of the real ones. But that's what we're trying to correct through Abibi Tumi, through the work that we're even doing right here today.
Benjamin Bediako says, "This is deep. I'm beginning to break it down." Yes, try and do that. I know you'll be going through your mind. What's he teaching? You couldn't see. It was illustration that he was doing. The cameras have captured it, and to be on abibituikasa.com. Most of the things that we're talking about here, the documents are there in the numbers. And then
what we're doing is what I refer to as the under ocean railroad. So during enslavement times, you have what they call the Underground Railroad, led by most notably Harriet Tubman, where she would lead people up off of the plantation and take them to freedom. Now, this is also what we're trying to do. We don't want to just be talking about, oh, we're trying to be conscious and then we're staying on these white platforms. What we're trying to do is wean people off of their whiteness in order to come and support the African one. So we'll give them a sample of what we're dealing with, but if they want to get the full thing, then of course we want to see them on African platforms.
That's good. I think that's a good strategy to get our people right there. Doc, so a friend of mine who's also a doctor and a neurosurgeon, he explained a reincarnation just like you are saying. He says, for example, I'm given birth, I live, I die, I'm buried, I decay, my physical body decay, form part of the soil. Okay. Then somebody grows plantain there.
Right.
My body, because my body has decayed and mixed with the soil, it nourishes the plantain.
Exactly.
The plantain tap the DNA, my DNA, from the soil. Then my DNA become part of the plantain. Somebody eats it, gets my DNA, and I live through that person. When that person gives birth, then I'm back. That looks more like physical, scientific. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about. So every aspect of the person, it just transforms into something else. So, you know, when we're looking at what reincarnation is all about, there are these aspects, physical aspects that we can talk about, but then there are the aspects that aren't necessarily physical or tangible, just like when you said Miwaha, but I didn't hear you say it. What happens to that aspect that we can't see? What happens to the aspect that was saying the Miwaha and that heard Miwaha, but we couldn't see it? That just like every other material aspect that we're talking about, also those aspects of the human being that are immaterial would also transform into something else. So, you know, I think the doctor is really talking about what we're dealing with. And then it also helps us to understand, and this was a point that I was just about to make, if you look at, you know, people having reverence for nature and people not wanting to be driven off of their ancestral lands, it's because everything that's around them is made out of their own ancestors. So if you're looking at the tree, and you don't just chop down every tree in the forest and then you'll make a sacrifice to that tree before you cut it down to make a drum. Why would you do that? Because you understand that that tree is made out of the same thing as your own great-grandparents. You understand? Same thing that's made out of yourself. So these are the things that we're talking about when we're looking at ancestral, you know, reverence, when we're talking about reverence for nature. Why would you have reverence for nature? Because I know that my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother who was on this exact same land, she is part of that tree that I'm chopping down. You understand? That my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is part of this.
This go to explain that the idea that when you pour libation, you pray to, like for example, a tree. You're going to cut a tree, and you pray and beg the tree before you cut it. It's got nothing got to do with paganism or idol worshipping and all of those things.
It's coming from a deep understanding of science, of the law of conservation of energy, law of conservation of mass, all of these things that, you know, essentially energy is not created or destroyed, it's only transformed. So by the same token, the way that you would, you know, propitiate the tree before doing something that you would need to do is the same way, or, you know, an analogous way that you would have respect for another person, another human being. So if I want to, you know, do something or whatever, I would ask you, oh, Kwabena, can I use this? It's yours. Can I use this? Oh, Kwabena, can I use that? It's yours. You understand?
And I think most often we don't do that because we think we human beings are in a way better than the trees, the forest, the herbs around us.
Yeah. Well, this is what happened, is that even though we're still ethnically African, in many ways we've been made anti-African through miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education, through entertainment, through religion, through all these things. So physically, we still have the basic building blocks to be African. However, internally, you know, this African self has been taken out, and then this alien white agent has been implanted. So to the things that we desire. And it's sort of like, if you look at, and there's a scholar named Amos Wilson, I'll put it in the X-Live group here, but he talks about similar things in terms of spirit possession and also in terms of multiple personality disorder. Now, looking at multiple personality disorder, he talks about, there's this guy, Timmy, but that's only one of his personalities. Now, when this one drinks orange juice, he breaks out in hives. When that personality is gone, another one comes and drinks orange juice, absolutely nothing happens. So physiologically, there's a reaction based on the type of consciousness that's in this person. You'll have cases where this particular personality smokes, you understand? Now, what is it doing? It's saying, based on this consciousness that's inside of me right now, I'm going to do something that I want, even if it harms the host body. So we know that the cigarettes, the smoke, and all this, it can bring about cancer, but it doesn't care. This consciousness that's inside of it, it wants to satiate itself. It wants what it wants, regardless of what happens. This is essentially the same thing that happens when we have this white consciousness in us. And the main way to get the white consciousness in us is through miseducation, diseducation, anti-education, through entertainment, through the movies that you watch and TV that you watch and all these things. And that sometimes is the most insidious because it's the one that seems like it's harmless, you're just laughing and you're just like, haha, it's just whatever. But this is how they get the thoughts to say, oh, product placement is in this movie. Then you go out and you just say, I just want to drink Coke. And you don't understand why you just want to drink Coke, but it's because you saw it placed in a movie one time, you know, at the climax of the movie, that the hero did such and such and such and such. Also through religion, and that one is very obvious if you're praying to this imaginary white boy. So let me just land on this point and then we can continue. But when you have this white, you know, agent that's been implanted in you, now even if it destroys the host body, even if it destroys the environment in which the host body lives, it wants to fulfill its tastes and its desires. So it just says, oh, I want Pizza Hut. Now, what if this isn't good for your blood pressure? What if this gives you diabetes? You know, you just say, I want KFC, I want this, I want that. So now, even though physiologically, biogenetically, you're African, every single thing inside of you craves that which is made by your enemies, whether it's the clothes that we wear, whether it's the language that we speak, whether it's the perm in the hair, whether it's the skin bleaching, that this is as a result of we have outer shells that are still African, but for many of us, entirely what is inside of us has been replaced. Or even when it's not entire, this is where you may have something that is inside of you that says, you know what, there's this disconnect, I'm fundamentally African. Then you start to reject this whiteness and you start to re-Africanize and de-whitenize. And that's against what your enemies want you to do. That's why they put all of these consciousness shaping tokens in your environment. So they'll just put this here, they'll just put that there. Now you just say, oh, I just want a phone made by Apple. Oh, I just want this made by this. I just want that made by that. Because they just put all of these things. This is why they spend billions and billions and billions on advertising in order to shape your consciousness and make you desire the things that fundamentally destroy you.
We're going to look at two things which is of reincarnation. One, the survival instinct of the African. And finally, we look at this brouhaha from the Department of Birth and Death Registration in Ghana, where they're saying names like Nana, Na, Ni will not be allowed to be registered in Ghana. The effects of the survival instincts on black in general, or Africans. Then finally we look at the naming system in Ghana, and that we wrap up. And we're here. Has sent in a message. It says, can Doc explain circumcision for both men and women quickly before we move on to the survival instincts of black people?
Very good. The best explanation I've seen for circumcision for both men and women is in a book called Conversations with Ogo Temeli. And I'll actually post the full citation of that. But basically what it deals with is the idea that from the creation story of the Dogon, that you had Ama, which is the name of the supreme being among the Dogon, who...
The Dogon, which country are they in now?
Primarily southern southeastern Mali, and then northern Burkina Faso.
Wow.
Right. So if you look at the Dogon, they'd say that in the beginning there was Ama who wanted to mate with the earth, and because the earth had this termite mound, that it wasn't able to mate with the earth because that termite mound was fundamentally male. So what Ama had to do was cut off that termite mound in order to mate with the earth and create life on the planet. Now, they say that any other instances of circumcision are in alignment with this original thing that was done during creation. Now, what they look at it as is that everyone is born, you know, as a human being, but males are born with an aspect that is fundamentally female. And
which is it?
So this is the foreskin. And in order for them to be full males, that they have to have the foreskin cut off. And then by the same token, women are born with something that's fundamentally male, which is the clitoris. In order for them to become full females, then, and you know, for both sides, for them to take on their full gender roles, then that one is also removed. And then it's, as I mentioned before, tied into the creation story. Now, you know, in modern times, we have this idea that, okay, the female one is bad. However, if we take that point of view, we also have to take the point of view that the male one is bad, but we don't hear about that one because the male one is accepted by these pale white Eurasians. However, it's the exact same reasoning, it's the exact same logic behind both of them. So if they call it FGM, then MGM also needs to be banned. And you know, again, also we have to look at it in context as not every African people who do it. Among the Akans, they didn't practice any form of circumcision, male or female. And as a matter of fact, even to this day, you can't be a ruler if you have any type. It was seen as a deformity, you know, something that has, you know, gone against how you were originally created. So again, you can look at some African people who do it, and then look at the reasoning and the logic behind it. You can also look at other African people who don't do it, and then look at the reasoning and the logic behind it. But again, if we're against the female one, and again, the idea is that the reason for the female one is to remove the masculine aspect so that she can take on her full gender role as a female. And then the same reason, and then this is also why it's not done at childbirth. This is done in puberty, so that it looks like you are leaning towards maleness. You know, you have all the physical things for a male, so to make you a full male will remove that. And they say that metaphorically, when the foreskin is cut off, then it becomes a lizard, right? And they said this is, you know, the metaphorical feminine aspect of the man being, you know, transformed. Then by the same token, they say that the clitoris is transformed like a scorpion. So again, this is the masculine aspect of the woman being removed. So, you know, again, that's, you know, in a nutshell. But I would also recommend, as I mentioned, this text, Conversations with Obadele. And it's a doggone deep thinker, what some people would say a philosopher or a sage. And I've actually posted the full reference for it there in the X Live interviews and information on Abibitumi. And before I was talking about spirit possession, Amos Wilson, the African psychologist who deals with that, I've also posted the videos about an 11-minute clip where he discusses specifically what we were dealing with before. When you have that consciousness out of you and is now shaped by someone else, what happens, you know, internally.
I think so. Actually, the question was sent by Ayodele Sosu. Let's go to the first thing that I said we'll look at before we leave here. That is the survival instinct and its effect on black people. First of all, what's the survival instinct?
Well, you can look at any creature knows, you know, one, who it is and then who its enemies are. And when we're looking at survival instincts, we're looking at this idea that survival as the first rule of nature, you know, in order to preserve life. And if you look at the various rituals and practices that we do, all of them are towards how to preserve life. So if you look at, you know, the rise of agriculture, it's to take things out of just circumstance and happenstance. All right, maybe we meet food here one year, the next year there's no food here. How can we take more responsibility in order to ensure that our children, that our progeny will have food to eat? Well, then we can start taking responsibility and store seeds.
I think I should expand my question more. I'm looking at the effect of survival instincts on Africans or blacks when, for example, instead of thinking of how to use our talents to develop something amazing for the next generation, we are stuck in what we will eat, where we sleep, how to transport ourselves in and out of places.
Right. A basic subsistence level.
You understand? Majority of Africans are not able to move beyond this stage and we pass on. So the cycle goes on in our generations. Whilst elsewhere, they've been able to go past this stage. So their kids grow up thinking of how to use their talent to benefit themselves and perhaps the world.
Right.
So let's look at some of the effects on we Africans and how we can move beyond the survival instincts.
Yeah, you know, what you're mentioning is not necessarily a bad thing. What's happened is that as opposed to survival of the collective, it's gone down to survival of the individual. And, you know, let me actually continue with the point I was making, and then I can land here because it all ties in together. So if we look at this original idea of how can we preserve life, not only on an individual level, but on a collective level, then we can look at the rise of agriculture as just that. So I can pass down my seeds and I can make sure that my children have something to eat. I can make sure my children have something to drink. And you can also look at pastoralism, where you're raising, you know, cattle, sheep, so forth and so on. It's like domestication of animals as the same thing. So as opposed to chasing after the animals and then one year we don't get any animals and everyone dies, How can we do something different? Well, let's keep the animals close to us and make sure that they're able to eat and drink and whatever, so that our children will always have, food, will always have milk, will always have whatever. You find that more in East Africa, but also in West Africa. Now, all of this is coming from the same idea of how can we preserve the collective? How can we preserve the life of the collective? What we see now is what happens when there is a break in that, where you're no longer thinking about how to preserve all black people, all African people. You're now down to, first off, what has happened is what we mentioned before: miseducation, diseducation, anti-education, religion, entertainment, politics, every single area of human activity. And some people have outlined this. My father has outlined this. Neely Fuller has outlined this, of these various aspects of human activity. That what happens when your enemies are the ones who give you all of your input and shape your consciousness is that you're no longer thinking about the collective, that you can now be brought down to a bare subsistence level of an individual, where it's just, what can I eat? Now, if you look at, millions of years, and matter of fact, last week we did Black History Month Film Festival at African Studies, and, I gave the analogy of, or actually just the documentation, that if you look at Dinknesh, when I went to Ethiopia, I saw Dinknesh, and this is what they call Lucy, that in Amarinya they call it Dinknesh, and this is the skeleton of the progenitor of all human beings on the planet Earth. Everyone has DNA that comes back to Dinknesh, and the name translates to "you are wonderful" in Amarinya. Now, if you look at this, we're talking about 3.5 million years ago. Not 3.5 million years ago. Even before that, you have Ardipithecus, which is dated about 4 million years ago. Now look at our water bodies. We'll just use that as an example. We had clear water bodies for 4 million years, all the way up to the last, let's say, 50 to 100 years. And we can even go, like in Ghana, we can see a major change has happened just in the last 5 to 10 years with the Galamsey and everything of that nature. So yes, what we're looking at is that people have this mindset of preserving life. And one of that, if you look at the 42 declarations of Ma'at, one is, I have not polluted the water. So you have this mindset that we need to keep the water pristine for the preservation of my progeny, of my, life, for millions and millions and millions and millions of years. But as soon as these pale white Eurasians are able to shape your consciousness through these factors that I've mentioned before, these consciousness shaping tokens, the movies that you go to see, the things that you look at, the things that you learn, that now you can have someone who has this little white agent inside of them. And my father puts it in terms of, this is Dr. Kambon. He says, you have people who are living with elephants for millions of years. And now if you look at, these documentaries on poaching, you have those exact same Africans. Now, genetically, they're Africans. Phenotypically, they're Africans, but their consciousness is absolutely anti-African, that now they will go to that same rhino and that same elephant and just cut the face off with a chainsaw. So something has changed. We were doing this, we were living in harmony for millions of years, but within the last few decades.
So are you therefore saying that we begin to get negative effect of survival instincts when we go individualistic?
Not only that, but when your enemies determine how you're going to interpret survival, and one of those ways is through money. And I was giving an analogy as well, that basically what these pale white Eurasians have done is that they're now making everyone suffer what they suffered. Now, if you look at the northern cradle and southern cradle theory, it's called the two cradle theory of Sekhanta Diop. You can find an African origin of civilization, several other of his books. He, broaches the subject. But basically, he explains the character and behavior of these pale white Eurasians. And again, Europe and Asia is just one thing. Europe is a figment of imagination. It's just one landmass. But he explains their behavior due to their environment. If you have very little resources, then it just comes down to who's the strongest one in the cave, who has the biggest club in the cave to hit you upside the head. And this is what they actually tell you through their own proverbs. They say might makes right, only the strong survive, survival of the fittest. These are all very Eurasian proverbs coming from a Eurasian worldview. And it comes from, if there aren't many resources, and look at Eurasia at that point in time, it's covered with, glaciers and tundras and snow and desert. So, if there are little resources, and there actually were little resources, then it comes down to, if I'm stronger, then I take the resources, then I can preserve life on my individual level. You understand? Now, if you look at the southern cradle, this is described by Sekanda Jopia Plenty, where in Ghana, I can go outside in the morning, and I actually did this on Saturday morning, and plucked about 30 mangoes. You understand? I can go out, I have contomere right in my front yard.
Somebody showed me a picture of a tide road, and in the middle of the tide road there's a plantain that has erupted.
Right there.
It's so amazing.
There we go in Africa. So, if you have this southern cradle type of environment, then you have everything surrounding you that you need, and that's where you can all eat out of the same bowl. And that's what, you even still see to this day in some places. Now, many people who have this Eurasian conscious, they have their own plate, they have their own knife, their own fork. Later for you, I don't care if you eat or not. But again, that's not very African. That's actually very anti-African. So again, I want us to understand that not every single thing you happen to see a continental African do is African. That especially in this day and age, many of the things that continental Africans and diasporan Africans are doing are anti-African, because their consciousness has been replaced by this little white agent inside. So again, to come back to this point of the individual, that when you see yourself, and basically what I was saying before is that the way that they do this is one through money. So even though you have all the abundance of resources that you would ever need, from food, clothes, shelter here in Africa, if they can flick a switch to tell you you don't have enough resources, that's where you get this individual survival mechanism
or
to kick in.
if you don't have this thing, you are not
which is money.
a full human being.
Which is the main thing, and there are many things, but the main thing is money. So now they can manipulate your consciousness by saying, all right, you have everything that you need to survive, literally. However, the way that we're going to flick this individual survival switch is tell you don't have enough of this, and it's called money. You don't have enough dollars, you don't have enough euros, you don't have enough pounds. So now you get to basically behaving like a Eurasian without enough resources. So you can't get enough of this resource of money. And even if you look at, the settler colonialism in Kenya and other places, the main thing that they had to do is to get people into a money economy, where they will go and say, oh, this land is fallow, you're not farming it, therefore it belongs to the British Crown. So now when you're done farming this side and you want to use your own land, you'll say, no, it's belonging to the British Crown. Now you have to pay us to use it. Well, where are you going to get the money from? Now you have to go to them to get the money. Now they've got you. This is one of the fundamental things that have changed, is that now they've gotten you into an imaginary system of you don't have enough of this resource, and it's called money. You understand? So all of this goes into, the point of your question. We went from a place of how can we preserve life for the collective, agriculture, pastoralism, all of these things are examples of, and even hunter-gathering, because when you are a hunter and a gatherer, and let's say you come to a place and there are fruits on the tree, let's say mangoes, you don't go and pluck every single mango. I'll give an example of this. My daughter, I told her to go outside and, get some ginger. Now, in front of our house, we have all this ginger growing because I wanted her to make a tea because my wife wasn't feeling well. Now, she went out with her friend, and they uprooted every single ginger plant that we had. Not a single one is remaining to this day. They uprooted everyone. So we had to have a talk about this, of if you're hunting, if you're gathering, or even if you're doing agriculture, you don't take every single thing that's there. You have to leave some so that even you yourself can come back, whether it's come back through reincarnation or whether it's come back in the next year. You understand? If you uproot everything, so even the hunter-gatherers are thinking in terms of, I'm not going to kill every single animal. If you look at a lion, it's not going to kill every single zebra.
Exactly. In August, most hunters don't go to hunting because they believe that in August, that's where the animals are pregnant and going to give birth.
Exactly. So you don't kill pregnant animals. There are certain days, Tuesday, where you don't go out to fish on the ocean. You understand? There are certain days, especially Thursdays, which is a Sasia's day, or some places Tuesday. That depends on really the location.
Most of Sashi land, we don't go to farm on Thursdays, yeah.
Very good. At Mampong, which is Guan land, Fridays and Mondays, you don't go out to farm. And it, some of it is determined by what a bosom is there and things of that nature. But despite the differences, you do it on a different day from us, so we're all different. No, the fundamental
Okay.
thing is this understanding. And I also wanted to come back into this idea of reincarnation, this idea that you yourself will be the one who will come back and partake of it. So it's not completely, oh, I'm just doing it for everyone else. There's this song, Akura Yakube, and I did a presentation on it, as well as the proverb from ancient Kemet, Pu'ank, which translates to life is a cycle. And in Akura Yakube is a man who's 98 years old. He goes out to his backyard to plant a coconut tree. And there are some young Brantia, and they say, oh, open I didn't know yes. He's like, why are you doing this? We're the ones who are going to chew it. He said, Menana, that I'm doing it for those descendants who will come back later. And he himself knows that if he himself will come back later, that he will get the benefit at that time. So it's not what am I going to get individually in my own lifetime. But again, if you look at the money economy and getting people into this, that's where you can create this false thing. And every single human being has it. I remember this story of these football players who crashed into the Andes Mountains, and that survival switch went off where they started practicing cannibalism. Anytime you're in a place where there aren't enough resources, then you start to do, how am I going to survive? Even if it comes down to eating the bodies, the flesh, and that's a very Eurasian thing. If you look at Eurasia, there are so many cases when they're talking about Dracula, when you're talking about all these things, they're actually documenting through their myth, through their mythology, their own practice of cannibalism, because when you're in a place that doesn't have enough resources, like Eurasia, then you're going to have to do that. Whereas that's not an imperative to do, because you can go out and get some mangoes, you can go out and get orchid or whatever.
So I want us to wrap up on the survival instinct. So I want you to pinpoint one or two effects that has come to stay with us because of we are so heavy under the effects of survival instincts.
Right. Yeah, and what I would say is, you know, in Anomansa, that's what they call Albina now, that in the tours, this is back in the 90s, and they don't do it. I've been on tours recently, they don't still say this, but if you go into the male dungeon, you make the right, and then you go into the right into the male dungeon, you'll see up top still is this, what looks like a trap door. It's a hole, like a rectangular shaped hole in the ceiling. And what they used to say is that what the Portuguese would do, and then those who took it over later, what they would do is that they would have all of these hundreds and hundreds of African men there in there, and they would open up the trap door after they are very hungry, they haven't eaten for like days or a week, and they would take a single loaf of bread and throw it in there. So this is before cable, so this is what they're using as their entertainment. Ha ha ha, look at them all fighting over this loaf of bread. So this is where you can see a literal change from being African to being anti-African to being on subsistence type of thing. I just need to make sure I survive on an individual level. So all of these were African people who were eating fufu out of the same bowl, eating millet out of the same bowl. They have plenty, you understand? But if you can get them to the point of we're all hungry and there aren't enough resources, this is how you can make someone biogenetically African, but now their consciousness...
Mentally, he doesn't think like an African.
He's anti-African, he is Eurasian, and Eurasian thought is fundamentally on many levels anti-African. From survival of the fittest, only the strong survive, to one thing has to be good, its opposite has to be evil, you know, all of these things. So the effects are what we can see in our life now, that now we're here in Africa, we're here in Ghana, there aren't enough resources. There are enough resources on a literal level, but the resource that they've created in your consciousness that there isn't enough of, that's money. So now you have to do whatever you need to, so we can look at all of Ghana and all of Africa as being just like that prison cell, you understand, that dungeon, and now they've thrown in a loaf of bread, and now they're looking at us scramble over this loaf of bread, you understand? So when I see reports of an armed robber who shoots this, I remember this is years ago, they were talking about, you know, an STC bus or whatever. It wasn't STC, but it was the bus that goes from Accra to Lagos. And there were armed robbers who assaulted the bus. They made the people get off the bus, and then they had the bus driver roll over them. Now, this is completely unnecessary, but again, something has fundamentally changed. They're biogenetically African. If you look at them, their skin is still black, whatever. That hasn't changed. But it's just like the one who was taking a chainsaw and cutting the face off of a rhinoceros, as opposed to having proverbs about how wise it is to observe the behavior of the rhino, how wise it is to observe the behavior of the Adwa or Esono or all these things, that we've gone from let's observe their behavior and what can we learn from it, to now kill everything because I need to just get enough to go into my mouth right now. and that's through the monetary economy. And there are various things, but money is one thing that I can definitely pinpoint as we're not doing barter anymore. We're not doing. We just
Commodities. Yesterday,
Right.
I went to stand at the seaside at Labadi, and I observed something in about 10 minutes, and I was so happy, and I said I'll find a camera and do a documentary of it. They were pulling this huge canoe from the sea, and everyone came to help. They sang and they pulled it out, and after pulling it out, I realized that many of the people were going, leaving the owners of the boat or the canoe to work on their fish. And I'm like, wow, this spirit of communalism and brotherness it still exists in Africa, and I think it's about time we highlight it and let people see how beautiful it is for us to go back to it, this Nobwa system and all of that.
Right.
Okay.
So those are the remnants of what we had. What was it was the rule, not the exception. So to even look at something like that, for you yourself to look at and say, "Wow, let's look at this, let's document it," like that would be like, "Oh, let's document the air. Let's document." It's like all around.
Exactly.
But now, because of this transition to all of us becoming black skin Eurasians, you understand? And again, what they're doing is they're making.
In other words, black people with white minds.
Exactly.
In 2015, there was this terrorist attack in France, which is an unfortunate thing. And the next morning, I wake up and every Ghanaian youth on Facebook, on WhatsApp, have changed. And not only Ghanaians, every people that I know on social media have changed their DPs into the color of France. And I'm like, whoa.
We didn't do that on a BB to me.
And
But again,
besides that,
yeah.
that was when Boko Haram was so strong on Nigeria.
Exactly.
No Ghanaian, no Nigerian changed their DPs to Nigerian colors. But you come back, it happens in France, just a day. And every youth in Africa changed their DP to France color. I'm like, whoa, there's a white man living in the minds of 99% of all black people.
And one of the ways to do that is by being on your Facebook, being on your WhatsApp. These are they'll make it easy for you. Oh, if you want to change it to the colors of France, just click this button. You understand? They'll make it easy. This is how they shape your consciousness. Now there have been several studies that came out, and I don't want to go off onto this tangent, but there have been several studies that come out of how they target ads at you. This shapes what you see. This shapes what you do. This shapes what you talk about. There are certain people who they'll type something about how racist something is, or any African consciousness information. They will take it down and they will ban you. They'll put you in Facebook jail. Now, all of these things we're putting you in an environment to shape your consciousness. Now, I remember in psychology class, they talked about these Skinner boxes. And what they are, this B.F. Skinner is this noted psychologist. He would take a glass cage and put some rats in there. Now, these ones, they have all the food they need. They have this little wheel they can exercise on. They have all the water. They never have any conflict. You can picture that as Africa. Now they have another, box that's all cramped. They have all these rats basically on top of each other. There's very little food, very little water. That it got to the point where they could predict the exact minute where they're going to have conflicts. You can picture that as Europe. Now what the Eurasians have done is basically extended that Skinner box to the entire world, and they're making all of us be in like this Eurasian type of thing. If we can control, you don't have enough resources.
And for my new listeners, you've been hearing Doc saying Eurasian. Eurasian means people from Europe and Asia.
Because Europe and Asia is one single landmass. Go look at your map if you don't believe me. You'll see Europe and Asia is one single landmass, right?
Obadele comes again and says that
I'm not going to answer him.
Oh.
Tell him type it on Abibitumi, otherwise I will not.
What if I tell you we sent this to me and Abibitumi in my
also
inbox? I'm also saying that. Do you think Africans on the continent suffered from post-traumatic colonial disorders?
One thing to say post means after. That means that it ended at some point in time. I would challenge you to give me the date on which it ended. So all of this post-slavery, post-traumatic, post-colonialism, when you say post, it means after.
It has ended.
It means it has ended. But none of these things have ended.
Wow.
Again, when we look at birth and death, our discussion from early on reincarnation, those things have not died. They've just transformed into what we now know as neo-colonialism, neo-traumatic, neo-enslavement. You understand? So he should really think about the language and the words that he's using if he was on a BB to me right now, he wouldn't have asked me that question. He would know that those things did not die; they've just transformed into other forms.
Exactly.
Also, because we've kind of segued back into reincarnation, I wanted to give you an actual story from my own life. Now, I mentioned all 3 of my children. We delivered them at home. We didn't take them to hospital. Me myself, I caught my son with my hands. I was the one who cut the umbilical cord. He had the umbilical cord around his neck. I was the one who loosened it. Now, my youngest is called Akosia. She was also born at home. We had, in all 3 cases, we had midwives, but the midwives never got there in time. Now, Akosia was born, I was actually at night teaching a class. Now, I was teaching a class, and my daughter said, oh, of course she was speaking Tree, and said, oh, and Afra will put your bra. So she was asking me to come because her mother was calling. Now I was like, oh, it must be time, because I know any day she's going to give birth. Now, as I walked from one part of the house to the other part of the house, I heard my wife saying, oh, come. She was like, help. Now I came, I was saying, oh, okay, she's about to give birth. She had already given birth within 30 minutes, right, from beginning to end. Now I came and I saw my daughter on her left knee, and my daughter wasn't breathing.
The
newborn baby was not breathing, and the umbilical cord was very short. Now, when the umbilical cord is short, this is often linked to other, health issues, and the baby may not survive even the first few minutes or hours. Now, basically, you have to get messages, and you have to be open to receiving messages from your ancestors, because my daughter was born with the amniotic sac around her
What's
head.
that one?
So the embryo is in what's called an amniotic sac.
Okay.
And this is where all those fluids are that the baby is surrounded and encased in, protective, nourishing, so forth and so on. Now, because she was born in that, she had that sac over her head, some of that fluid had gone into her lungs and had, choked us up, so she was not able to breathe. So when I got there, her body was cold and she was limp, she was not breathing, you understand? So what I did, they have these aspirators. It looks sort of like an enema tube, this aspirator. And I knew that we had one in the next room. I went and I got this aspirator, and I came and I realized that for my son, because he didn't have that coil around this amniotic sac around his head, is that I was able to just suck it out with my mouth. So I was able to just put my mouth around his nose and suck out the fluid. It's not very delicious, but you do what you need to do. And pull that out. But because this was so thick, it was like almost like a thick mucus, that I tried that first, but it wasn't coming out. So what I did is I used this aspirator in order to first push air into her lungs. So I pushed it and the air went in, and when I was pulling out this fluid. I did this 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then eventually, one thing that you learn in CPR is that if you have someone who's choking or whatever, like a child, you'll put them over your lap. So I said, let's change the position too, so that any of the fluid can actually come out and be assisted by the force of gravity. So we did that, put the child on the lap, and I was still doing this. Eventually, the first thing we heard was, so it was working. So the air was going in the home, and then this fluid was coming out. That's what we would call noon. So we say in creation, the beginning of creation, there was nothing but fluid, this liquid. That liquid was now coming out in order to let my aunt come inside. So, and then eventually she cried, and this was the best sound you ever heard. Because, one thing my wife was saying, like, even if we wanted to go to the hospital, there wasn't enough time to go there. She had even said, all right, let's go to, the baby would be dead. There would be no child if we took the time to even go to Legon Hospital, even up the road, that the baby needed to breathe, very quickly. So these are the messages that we get. Now, the reason why I bring this up is it goes back to this idea of how would this be seen in an African worldview. It would be seen that my daughter's playmates in the ancestral realm didn't want to let her go. You understand? The same way that you would perform CPR, whatever, to make sure that, your loved one is able to stay with you. That's what it would be seen in an African worldview, that her playmates wanted to keep her on that side. Now, for me, I want her to come to this side, so I'm doing the same thing. So they're doing their CPR on from Asamando side. I'm doing my CPR from what we would call Kunseke side on this side, Asasiso, and eventually we won out. So she was able to be born. So the same way that you would celebrate the naming ceremony 8 days after. They would celebrate their funeral ceremony 8 days after on that side. That's the same reason why we do those same things. We do our 40-day celebration, our 1 year, and so forth and so on. In the ancestral realm, they do the same thing. So on the day of the naming ceremony on this side is the day of their, 1 week on that side. So again, it's seen that these things are in parallel. If we walk upright in this realm, that must mean that they're upside down in that realm. If we eat food and defecate feces in this realm, it must mean that they eat feces and defecate food on that realm. Now, it would sound ridiculous until you start to think, okay, what is fertilizer? You understand? You put feces into the ground, and then what comes up is food. You understand? By the same token, we eat the food, and then we, so these are some of the ideas that's based on this idea of basically a mirror reflection. So the same way we would go through rites of passage in this realm is the same way that they would go through a rites of passage in that realm in order to eventually become an elder and then be an ancestor reincarnated in this side.
All right, thank you very much, Doc. But finally, let's look at what is going on at the Birth and Registration Department of Ghana, where they are saying that they are banning names like Nana, Na, Me, and the rest.
Right. Yeah, what you see going on there is abject ignorance, because they still retain title names, just the ones that they don't understand. As a matter of fact, there was someone who came in and said, oh, the name Amir, it just means chief. It's the same as saying, Nana or whatever. But they will register that because it's in Arabic and they don't understand it. You understand? A lot of these names that they have, Amir, right? So there's a famous boxer named Amir Khan. And that was his own name, A-M-I-R. A-M-I-R. It's like when you say the Emirates.
It's the name we use in the Western region, Amir.
No, that's different. A-M-I-R, Amir.
Amir, okay.
Right? Okay. It's similar when you're talking about the Emirates, right? That's the flight and whatever. Okay. Saying this is the Emir or whatever. The pronunciation is just slightly different. But there was a commentator on this who said that's my own name, and they would never say they wouldn't register because they don't even understand it. When they have names like Henry and George and whatever, they just don't understand it. It's just sounds. It's like a caveman coming out and grunting. You don't know what it means. So you register all these things, but you don't understand the one that means king. They don't understand the one that means chief or this or whatever. Now, I don't like the term chief in our African context because that's their way of saying that only in Eurasia do they have kings. Ours are lower level. We'll call it chief and sub-chief and paramount chief and whatever. But just going through that to make the point that what you have going on there is abject ignorance, much less before we even get into the deep thought of what is this actually saying. It's saying that if you have an elder will call the newborn child Menana, right? This is my grandparent. That's the reason why it's an elder in a traditional society who will be the one who gives the name, because that is the one who is best equipped to recognize their own grandparent when they reincarnate. So again, what you have is you have people at the birth and death registry who are physiologically, who are biogenetically African, but fundamentally they don't learn any of these things that we're talking about. Where would they learn about these concepts? Where would they even learn about the scientific concept of,
and I think
energy
some
not
of
being
the laws they
created or
use
destroyed?
are still antique laws from Britain,
right?
That they use over there.
Very much so. But again, the core of this is when you are miseducated, diseducated, and anti-educated, then the decisions that you make are things that are to the detriment of African people and to the benefit of Eurasian people. So there was I went to a friend of mine, he had a naming ceremony, and he named his child all African names. Now you have this Eurasian-brained pastor who came and said, oh, you don't want to give them at least one, Eurasian name?
Christian names.
That's what they will call it, right? Billy or Bob or Cosby. It's like, where's Cosby in the Bible? Is that? There's like, just choose anything from Eurasia and just stick it on the child as a label on their forehead and go with it. You understand? So, this is someone who is black, skin, biogenetically black. However, the mindset is something that I will make every decision that is against African people and that promotes Eurasian people psychologically. It promotes them socially. It promotes them economically. It promotes them in the area of health or disease in their case.
Okay.
I think, you know, what I see is that we transition from one subject to another, and it's very natural.
Exactly.
So I think this is a direct outgrowth of our discussion today. So I would be happy to deal with names and significance.
All right, so we have Dede back here, listening to us right here in Accra on the line. Good morning, Dede. Hello.
Yes, hello, good morning.
How are you doing, Dede?
I am doing very good.
Mm.
I'm doing very good.
I hope you've been listening from the beginning.
Yes, I have listened to you.
Okay, and what's your first of all what's your take on the topic before you go to why you called?
Well, I love the topic and I'm wishing it could be on a larger platform that everybody can listen into, because we're talking about the black body with a white mind, and it's on a very large scale where it's free to air and everybody can just tune in and so if you could go that way, would really help to fight, or let's say to combat this white mind washing thing that is happening to us. And then I had to say something. I wanted to say, like, I'm one person who has believed in reincarnation for a very long time. I'm one person with memories of past lives I have lived. I'm one person with ideas of what I have been before, what I have done before, and my collection.
I hope Doc is jotting down some things. Yeah, go on.
Yes.
Go on, Dede.
Okay. So what I want to say is, society kills it out of you. Society honestly kills it out of you, that you lose character because you can't speak about it, and these are not things that you bottle up. These are things you shoot for people to identify and to help you find your true path. But you speak about it in our old days, people who are 80 years, and you tell them and they go like, hey, we move to do and then it just becomes like you have to kill it and walk on this path where you lose everything. If Dr. Kambon can do something about it, where people like that can get the commune and then discuss it and then get into the path forward, it'll be very good. And he's doing a very good job. I've been listening lately, but he's doing a very good job.
Okay. Doc, he's talking about the fact that she, in particular, remembers her past life. Have you heard of this thing before? People who know their past life.
Yes. One thing that I would like to bring up is she mentioned that she believes in it. Where I would look more towards is knowledge. You understand? It's not just, I just believe it and I want to believe it, so therefore I believe it. If it's something that she knows, she needs to frame it in those terms. Because when we're talking about belief, we're talking about, all right, a white man comes and says there's a white man in the sky who sits on a throne and blah blah. That's belief. You understand? It's not based on anything. It's not based on anything tangible. If she actually has a memory, it's like, oh, I remember what I did last week. So she should frame that in terms of, I know that this is the case. I know that that's the case, and that's actually much more empowering.
Okay.
She should document what it is that she
All
knows.
right. The second part is that anytime she wants to talk about it, people are like, this is so frightening, stop talking about this and all of that. You remember what you've been here to do before. You know, people are scared of hearing this.
Right.
And what advice do you have for her about that part?
Yeah, there's a saying, if you can't change the people around you, change the people around you. Right?
If you can't change the people around you,
change the people around you.
how do you do that?
So the first one means if you can't change their mindsets, then change the people who you surround yourself with.
Okay.
Right? I hope that's it.
Yeah.
So obviously she's talking to the wrong people. So matter of fact, last week we had Dr. Funlayo Wood, who spoke about African spiritual systems throughout the world. And we had, a good few dozen people who are on a Bibitumi, and we were having a deep discussion about all of these things about reincarnation and so forth and so on. Based on a very scientific understanding of, just like how we've done today, of energy, of matter, of transformation, of all of these types of things. So what I'm hearing her say is that she's around people who are at a very low level of consciousness, very low level of understanding. They may be black physically, but again, they may be anti-black, anti-African internally. So what I would say is that you would need to surround yourself with a different type of people with a different type of mindset, And again, this is what Abibi to me is all about. So, you know, and I've said that I've started a dental practice. I'm now a dentist because it's like trying to pull teeth to get people to do what is right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, people will say, oh, I want to have people who understand me. I want to have people with a higher level of consciousness. You know, if I say this, I can't talk around these people. And what we're saying is that there is a place where you can discuss all of these things around people who are 100% black, both internally and externally, and you don't have to deal with those things. But at the same time, you have people who, you know, it's like you want to have your cake and eat it too. I want to be on white platforms, but then I don't want people to have white thoughts on these white. No, it's a package deal.
It won't work.
It's a package deal. So that would be my advice: is that we have hundreds and hundreds of people who are spiritual practitioners on Abibi to me right now. You can look up the user Nana. That's my own mother who's in a Comfort, you know, initiated and trained. Dr. Funlayo E. Wood just came and gave a presentation, you know, talking about some of these things. There's someone, Ifasewa, this is the wife of Mfundishi, who just did a talk on Saturday. She's on there. She's initiated into the Yoruba spiritual system. So there are all these people, all these resources. And again, we actually just had a talk about this exact same thing that she's saying she couldn't talk about. If she was part of the conversation, then she could start to feel like she's part of a community and not, oh, I'm weird, or I'm just believing this and blah, blah, blah. Okay. No, this is knowledge. This is African knowledge, and it's part of our African deep thought tradition.
All right, I think this is where time will permit us to bring a whole thing down here. And my producer, who does as my technician, has told me to mention and spell Abibi to me slowly for my listeners so that they can go there. Abibi to me is
Abibitumi. Very easy.
Yeah.
Abibitumi.com. And when you come there, right? When you come there, you can sign up. You can join the social stream. All the things that we're talking about.
People also tell me that they go there and sign up is difficult for them.
Sign up is difficult. Are they mentioning what issues they're having when they're signing up?
One guy told me that he does everything that you need to do and it doesn't show. It's just like mine.
So you rejected him? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll look into that. We have people, dozens of people who sign up every day. We'll look up. And again, if anyone is having an issue signing up, just send an email to info as in information at abibitumi.com, and we'll deal with it personally.
Okay.
If this isn't some huge multi-trillion-dollar thing that's been made rich by black people, this is, you know, we have people, technicians who are on the ground who will walk you through step by step on an individual level.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's cool. You can send a message to info@abibitumi.com. Your final words and we sign up.
Yeah, so in conclusion, so we've discussed reincarnation, we've discussed energy, not being created or destroyed, only transforming. And, you know, even in the course of our own life, we can look at our transformations through different levels, rites of passage. We can look at, you know, the puberty rites of passage, marriage as a rites of passage, eldership as a rites of passage. And we can also look at our final transition, what seems to be final, what we refer to as death, as just another rites of passage, which is then birth in the ancestral realm. So if you look at the book of Coming Forth by Day, the instructions are how to be reborn into that realm as an excellent spirit. If you look before that, the coffin text, if you look before that, the pyramid text, and all of these things are talking about how to preserve life, not only on an individual level, but on a collective level as well. So once we have knowledge, again, we're not dealing with belief, or I just believe this, there's no evidence I believe it. That what we need to do is learn. Then after we learn, then we can know, what did our ancestors say about this? What were the instructions that they gave for this? And then what were the end results? Was the end result pristine water, or is the end result now, when we don't quote unquote believe stuff, the dirty, you know, Kole Lagoon, the dirty Pra River, all of these things? So whatever our mindset is, whatever our consciousness is, it has an actual impact on the environment that we live in. So once we start to re-Africanize and de-whitenize, a lot of people like to re-Africanize, meaning, oh, let me just put on this dashiki, let me just put on these beads or whatever. But what a lot of people have a challenge with is de-whitenizing.
You don't work on the mind.
So de-whitenizing is taking out that little white beast Neanderthal that's been planted inside of you that makes you want the things that you want, that makes you just say, oh, I just happen to want this, without ever questioning how come every single thing that I happen to want enriches my pale white Eurasian enemies. So these are the things that we need to look at: re-Africanization, de-whitenization for total African liberation.
All right. Thank you very much, Doc, for always coming here to educate us. This has been Good Morning Africa.
Your views, and your views. What would life be without an X?